What's up, YouTube? Drew here from Petcock with a job that sucks. I'm not sure this is covered, but there is a steel pipe, which is this guy right here. I don't know, maybe it's a 3/4 inch pipe, whatever. Anyway, there is a steel pipe that runs. You guys can see it if you look down right there. See that rusty thing right there? It's a little bit, I'm trying to get the camera to focus on it right there. That pipe, and that's the issue with this car. I smelled coolant and it's leaking there because it's rusty. That pipe runs underneath the manifold or the plenum, I should say. This is the plenum, this is the manifold, to somewhere over in here to deliver coolant to the heater. I'm gonna walk you guys through how to do this job. The first thing you're gonna need to do, I am wearing on my head, I'm wearing it's like a $25 Energizer LED lamp, and I used this pick, which you can get a couple of these at Harbor Freight, pretty darn cheap, and I find I use them quite a bit. If you look down in here, there is a clip, and if you get in between, you see that little black square amidst the light gray there. If you get in there, you can open up that clip, and this guy swings down, and then this comes off. Okay, this is a plastic tie that holds it into this bracket. So the right way to handle that clip, I'll show you guys. There is a tab right here. I got in there with my pick, but you could do it with your finger, and it undoes. It's like a tie wrap, and it undoes it, so you can use it again later. Then again, using your pick is this little guy right here, or just your finger, I guess. But right here, if you push on this, that way, it allows this to lift up, and you have now got this wire out of your way. So pretty important to the job is you don't want to break a wire. There is one more right here, this blue one, which is the straightforward kind. If I can get this heater hose to move, there we go. You would push down there and it should come right off. Of course, with one hand it's a little bit difficult, but yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Push down there and that will back off, and then this wire is completely out of your way for the job. So this hose that was in my way, take it off, either off of the plenum or off of this vacuum line, because it has to anyways, which makes it much easier. And I'll show you guys again this clip right here. You just pull that back and it slides off this bracket right here. Then this guy is a pretty, simple, you push down on the tab there and it slides out of this right here, and then this wire is out of your way. Make sure you secure it, and there is a bunch of bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and possibly some that are hiding to get this plenum off. So some of these angles are pretty awkward, so I just wanted to show you guys. I like the swivels for impacts better, because they're not so, like, they only bend a little bit. Like any U-joint that bends at a 90-degree angle is kind of useless, so I don't like the, the chrome vanadium ones that are like that, like steering column style. I like these remind me more of like a CV shaft, like a ball and socket that turns. So there's a short extension, a long extension, and I use these things a lot more than I ever thought I would. They seem like a gimmick, but they're super handy. So that's how I'm getting at some of these awkward ones. By the way, these are studs. One of them came out, which is fine. Obviously, we'll just put it back in that way. But those are studs. That are nuts. I don't know if there's any more. I hope there's not. So there is one hiding. There's the one from the top. It's right there. If you get down in, bam, there's one hiding on you. So removing the air tube that goes to the throttle body, there is this metal pipe that the larger pipe goes in here, then the smaller one goes to this coolant line for the throttle body. Now, I had purposed to leave that on, and like a turkey, I ripped it off. Anyway, I'm, still being obviously very careful. But what I wanted to show you guys, 10 millimeter hose clamp, 10 millimeter hose clamp. There's wiring here. Obviously, you want to be very careful, but this guy does very gently flip out of the way and sit somewhere safe without disconnecting any of the wiring. And my accidental disconnection of this coolant line is good for you guys because it showed that only what was, right at the tip there came out. It's not going to leak. It's not going to drain any of the coolant. So, if you have to do that, it's looking like you do. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to move the throttle body out of the way to get to that hidden bolt, which is the counterpart for this one, but underneath. This harness here plugs into the throttle body. It is your standard kind that has the, the tab you press to loosen it up, but I found getting in there with my pick between it and the base and wiggling a little bit to get it started was helpful. As you saw, there's 4 bolts. They're 8 millimeter, 12 millimeter socket. This guy was really sticky, so the nut built into the back of this was, kind of thing. I ended up using a bunch of extensions and an impact, and when I put it back together, I will absolutely put a little anti-seize on it in case this ever has to be done again. What I've done here is I've taken a piece. This is just Romex, the neutral cable for some Romex I use. Non-conductive unless the end of it's stripped, and I use it as shop cable. I went around something metal. That's a metal bracket that holds those 2 wires, obviously not against the wires. That opened up a whole bunch of space to be able to work here. So this guy's gonna have to come out, which we could probably do right now. We'll find out if it's air, vacuum, or coolant. More on that in a second, but trying to get to that bolt that's underneath the plenum so we could get it out. Tons of fun. Just want to show you guys again where that hose is. Right there. So, as you can see, can't really see it from the top, but it is right there. Not too bad, not fun either. That's my arm all twisted backwards, putting left-hand palm pressure on the head of the socket. It's rusty. So what I did is I got my extension on it, and I got the head of my socket and just tapped ever so gently, and you could actually see the end of the extension, move toward the block, which means the 12 millimeter socket was going around the rusty bolt head. And then you don't have much room. So I'm pushing, not enough to, hurt myself, but I'm pushing hard on the bolt with my left hand. Then I took my cheater pipe, not because the bolt is so tight that you can't get it. You don't have the leverage. And the last thing you want to do is really lean into it. So I set my pipe on it and just gave it like a snap and cracked it loose, right? Again, not because extra strength is required. There's no chance that if you can't break this bolt free with a regular 3/8 ratchet that you're not going to strip it anyway. Just it was to get, first of all, to get on that. I mean, it's far below. It's down in. I can't get my hand on it. And also to give it that quick snap instead of, it's maybe on there with 25 foot-pounds or something. So it's not it's not that it's stuck. It's that it's extremely hard to get to. So that's a regular extension, and it's not a deep or a shallow socket. It's just a regular socket like that one. Do me a favor. I know we're not even halfway done, but if this right here is helpful, go ahead and like the video. This has not been easy, and holding the phone while doing it totally sucks, but I don't want to leave you guys hanging. Hopefully this video is helpful. And again, just please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to make people's lives easier and also show you guys some cool cars. So little plug for the channel, just give it that thumbs up and subscribe if especially this miserable part is helpful. We're underneath in this hole, and if you look, just past the coolant hose, 1, 2 bolts on this bracket. This is nasty. I'm laying on my back on a piece of cardboard, but I believe those 2 bolts are the last thing holding that manifold in. So when I was doing this job, I had the car on level ground, and I didn't realize that, yes, of course, you can get to the bolts, that bolt right there, and the ones that are past that coolant hose in the plenum from this hole, but it's actually easier to get them from behind the splash guard. You could actually see the bolts, which means it would be a straighter line with your extensions to get to them. So use the hole or use behind it, whatever's better for you. Okay, so I only had one stud. If the nut comes off of your stud and you have two, once you slide, you get those two bolts out of the bottom, obviously. Same deal with the studs here. One of my studs came out, one of my nuts came off. Anyway, so once you have the bottom bracket disconnected, it should slide out enough. I did not disconnect this. I rotated it out of the way. One thing to keep in mind, I showed you guys in the very beginning of the video about unplugging this one. Unfortunately, this has that similar clip where it clips here onto a metal bracket, and on mine that was rusted out, and in trying to you know, get it off, it was so corroded and swelled in the plastic it actually broke. So I'm gonna have to very, very carefully you know, reattach this with tie wraps and some kind of, I probably have like a piece of neoprene or whatever, insulation, so it doesn't rub or anything. So here's our suspect, this nasty pipe. There's the new one sitting right there. It looks like the only thing left is there's a connection of this wiring harness into it. We'll have to, I'll inspect that and see how it works, and then probably, I can feel it with my finger, right there is a bolt. I have to drain the cooling system, which I'll show you guys the Petcock for the radiator in just a moment, and then very carefully see how that is in there. I've read somewhere a long time ago when I ordered the part from Japan that it's just like an O-ring type fitting. It looks like, so there's the bracket. I don't know if you can see that. There's the bracket. That's the connection to the wiring harness, and then in the back is the hole that's above the wiring harness right there. And then over here, it looks like there's another hole where there would be a bolt and another one of those fancy wiring harness clips. And there is the clip. If you can see underneath that dirty, kind of rusty clamp, underneath that's the harness clip, and then it looks like right there. So you're gonna see a wiring harness with a rainbow of wires on it, a tube with the end of it exposed, and then in the middle there's a piece of corroded aluminum, kind of like right there. Looks like I'm touching it, I'm not. Is apparently the bolt, looks like a 10 millimeter for the final bracket. So the Petcock to drain this bad boy. The brass hammer, in case you're wondering, I gently tapped the socket, the extension to you know, it's a really, really rusty nut. Tapped that to get it on there so I didn't strip it, because this is miserable enough without stripping it. Anyways, from the front of the vehicle, the hole that I showed you guys those nuts and bolts in, right there's the Petcock for the radiator. So I am just going to, I'm working on a cold vehicle, hasn't run in about 24 hours. I'm going to take the radiator cap off. I just heard a little drip, that's not good. Anyways, I'm going to take that off and just open that Petcock and drain the coolant. It actually is a little bit easier to get to from the top, and if you're like me and you're getting a little bit too old to be getting on the ground, off the ground, on the ground, off the ground, that might work better for you. I just slid the catch bucket, which I did hose off, by the way, to make sure it was clean and for the most part dry, because I don't want to contaminate this coolant. Get it from the top, and it's just like a nut, basically a plastic nut. I gently used a pair of pliers, and I might be able to even show you. I loosened it already. And there you go. Unfortunately, the trickle I heard when I undid the radiator cap was this little coolant line. The wiring harness here, very simple. It's the exact same type of setup as those other clips I was showing you guys, where there is like a little tab at the bottom that you pull down. You don't push it in, you pull it down, right there. I'm gonna zoom in if I can. Right there, see the tab? You pull that down like this. I found it easier to use 2 hands, and then it slides right off of this, which you guys have already seen on the new one. And then the bolt hole above it there, that bolts right here. About to get that off. So again, super rusty. So I set the socket on there as best I could with my hand. If I jump on it right now with a wrench, no way I'm not gonna damage the edges of the bolt head and then, you know, have a real problem on my hands. So I got it started. This is what I do. It works for me. Do your own thing, obviously, but anytime I can use impact, I do, because it's rotational. A lot of times when you strip or break a bolt, it has to do with, like, you know, sideways forces from using, you know, a wrench, which obviously all your force is coming from, you know, one of the 360 degrees of rotation, if that makes sense, where an impact is, you know, that's not the case. I can't get an impact on here. I would love to have a 3/8, you know, air ratchet that was impact instead of torque. I have one that's torque, and it has smashed my hands in between, you know, bodies of cars and engines and stuff, and it's just, it sucks because it's rotational force rather than impact, which is like a tapping sensation. It's why you could take, you know, 120-pound lug nuts off with one hand. Anyway, so what I do is just not doing this hard at all. Don't want to damage anything, but you could maybe see, I could from where I'm standing, but you could maybe see how that went on the nut more. And the goal is just to not strip it. So I got it on there as best I can. I'm going to do all I can with my right hand. I'm right-handed, to support the head of the ratchet while I use my left hand to apply hopefully enough force to loosen the bolt without stripping the head of it or popping my socket off. Okay, so you can see here it didn't even get all the way on. Thank God I tapped it. And by the way, I use a brass hammer because you never use a hardened steel device to hit another hardened steel device, because it can launch a shard at a couple hundred degrees Fahrenheit and probably a couple hundred miles per hour, whatever, at you. Anyway, pardon the tangent. Tapped it in there. Big help. And made sure I held where the socket and the extension meet to keep everything even, and cracked it with the left hand. If you can see down there, right there on this clip. So you're looking at the clamp on the heater hose, which you don't need to touch. Right underneath it is this clip. It's the same type. You're gonna lift it up and slide that wiring harness, this wiring harness, off of the clip. And then this bolt right here, which to me looks like a 10. I have no idea how I'm going to get to it yet, but I'm going to get to that, take it off, and then this hose clamp right here is the only thing stopping this pipe from coming out. So you see that right here, that harness, and then that's the plug that was in it. That's your standard, you know, squeeze and pull, not the tab like in the brackets. It's like a regular male-female connection. Your bolt right there. This is take number 3. I was using 3/8, then I was using quarter, and coming, you know, way up here with the wrench, and I can't get the right angle on it. So here's the only thing that's going to work. You're going to get on it with, I just happen to have a short extension, but that's a 10 millimeter and a short extension. And then I built a little cheater pipe out of a metric deep socket that I had on hand that fits over the handle of my ratchet, and a short extension, because I couldn't get enough leverage on this tiny little wrench way down here on a rusty bolt. So that's what'll do it. Okay, so this is an experiment, but the angle that I need to pull that out, I could get it almost perfectly by using a pry bar against the top radiator support, and very gentle taps on the top of it with my palm. I got in there with an air tool and blew out all the debris, or as much of it as I could, to stop it from falling into that thermostat housing or whatever it is that the pipe goes into when it comes out, being obviously careful to blow it away from, you know, the intake there, so as to not put rust chips into the motor. And in doing so with an air tool, it actually perforated. So this thing was like a 40-mile trip away from a catastrophic failure. Very, very, very disappointed with this design. But again, my opinion is kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, as Honda is a multi-billion-dollar company, and I'm a guy in my garage whose biggest accomplishment is that. So anyway, gonna try this and hope for the best. Worst case, that housing needs to come off, and it's probably gonna be miserable because the bolts are pretty rusty and actually like flaked apart. So having fun. Okay, so it broke, which is awesome. I am a bit biased, but I don't believe it has anything to do with me trying to use the pry tool. I think that was as close to the perfect direction of pull that it needed, but like I said, it was rotted through. So tons of fun. So I started experimenting a little bit, and I got it to move a tiny bit with a seal puller, but here's the problem. You got to keep alternating as it tips, you know, as it tips in the hole. We'll pretend that my fingers are the outer edges of the pipe. As it tips this way, and that you got to tip it that way, you got to kind of, it's going to tip as you work its way out, and you got to go to where it's lowest in the hole and move it there, and then it'll make the other side lower, and you work it out. So this only works from one side. So I am going to use flat blade screwdrivers to get, you can see it's all the rust and crap, and then there's a shiny ring, then there's what looks like a light gray ring, which is just the light from my phone reflecting on kind of like the base of the bottom of a bore, if that makes sense, like the shoulder of a bore. I'm going to get in there and just rotate the screwdriver gently, hoping I don't break this plastic piece. The key here is going to be gentle. And the other thing I noticed too, it's sealed with an O-ring, which would be in that groove on the new one. Like, really? They couldn't include that in the new part? I'm again, very, very disappointed by this design and this process, but I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to get you guys through it, so sit tight. Okay, so the rocking back and forth would have been perfect if it wasn't kind of reseating itself every time I backed off. So what I ended up doing was using the seal puller and just going for it, because I need to get through this job, and it would make more sense for me, not for you, but for me, to have to replace this if I crack it, which I did not. I was very fortunate. I did put a tiny little chip in it, if I can get the camera to focus, but as you can see, it's way up. The rust ring is above where it seals, and everything below that rust ring is, I don't want to say what matters, all of it matters, or Honda wouldn't have built it, but the only purpose of the part where I put that tiny chip is to act as like a bevel for everything to seat in. So, and it'd be impossible to show you guys, but the chip is so far up that that in this particular case, it's not going to matter. I don't ever want to do this again, but if I have to, I'm going to build a tool. I'd connect to a paintless dent removal slide hammer and kind of tap this bad boy out. So if I do that again, I'll make a tool and I'll put it on the channel, but not sure of a tool that exists that would have made this any easier than the seal puller, which again put a tiny little chip up in the guide part. The way that it's beveled out like that, that's what would guide the O-ring into the bore. Has nothing to do with where it seals or anything like that, so that's still a good part, thank God, because I did not want to replace it. But yeah, it's out, so anything that's relevant for reassembly, I will record. So that hose clamp would be difficult to get to, because you know it's quite, you want to get at it. You know, there's 1, 2, and then 3, like in a triangle. Fingers you got to collapse, and the best way to get to it would be like this, but you can't get your hand down there. So just a generic tip, you can't have enough configurations of pliers. These bad boys were like, I don't know, like $8 at Harbor Freight. I'm sure Snap-on makes a version for like 60, but I don't think for the extra $52 or whatever that these suck that bad. Anyways, I got down there, clip, moved it up, and we're good. If you get stuck, here's what you're gonna do. Reach in there, grab the hose with everything you got and squeeze on the rubber part, and then use what's left of your pipe. You got your manifold plenum, which is still connected, your throttle body. Obviously use common sense with this, don't damage anything, but I was able to, you see where the pipe is shiny above the collar, it was in there. Squeeze that rubber part as hard as I could here, and then rocked this back and forth as I kind of pulled the hose away from it. Don't try to get it off the heater core, because if you damage that, your life's going to get real miserable real fast. you've already damaged, you're replacing, because it's damaged, this side of it. So just hold the rubber with everything you got and rotate it out using the leverage of what's left of your pipe. Also, don't forget your throttle body. See that hose, how it goes from the throttle body there? It kind of does like a little backwards J. It is connected to this pipe. Just don't forget that guy, okay? All right, thank God it's reassembly time. Just a little forward, the neck that the O-ring goes into down there. Clean that out really good. I used a fresh blue shop towel soaked in coolant to clean that out. I cleaned the O-ring, which, as you can see, has its complete crown and is reusable. The coolant is what I use to clean it. The coolant is what I'm going to use to lubricate it to get it all back together. Remembering that it's a bit of a volatile situation with the connection here. You don't want to break the plastic neck that it goes into. You don't want to damage your new pipe. Just make sure that your bolt holes are lined up. I mean, if it's lined up there and it's lined up on the 10 millimeter bolt hole, which you can kind of see. I've got this long screwdriver. I'll point to it for you. It looks like I'm touching it. I'm not. Right there. That bolt hole. Just if that's lined up, then you know you're okay. You just don't want to have to do this again. It should be easier this time than when it was rusty, but that's a pretty snug fit, as it should be, considering that it has no other way to hold pressure other than being snug. Just make sure you're not like wrapped around anything stupid or anything, but line up that bolt hole. That should automatically line up that one. And again, the opposite of disassembly. This is pretty simple, by the way. It's tough to do, but you're just going to grab it right above, you kind of right on the 90-degree bend there, and wiggle it back and forth as you push down. If you followed my instructions, I just dipped the entire end with the O-ring and everything. I dipped both ends of the pipe in my coolant, which is kind of like a lubricant to get them together, and we're not using any chemical that's foreign to the cooling system or the materials anyway. So yeah, it was snug like it should be, but it wasn't rocket science. I just grabbed it, wiggled it as I pushed down, felt it bottom out, and called it good. I was just going to put in the 8 millimeter, 12 millimeter head into the bracket there that holds the large wiring harness at the end, and I just thought I'd show you guys one of my tricks. Not rocket science, but it works great. Little piece of shop towel or paper creates pressure so your screw doesn't fall out, and I threw it into the motor. Cool. Anyway, that will help you if you don't throw it. Just a word on torque specs. I'm not a slob, but for what it's worth, I don't think on things like brackets, I can get to a really good place by feel. I do not trust my feel with things like intake manifold to intake plenum. What I looked up said 16 foot-pounds for these 8 millimeter bolts and 16 foot-pounds for the bolts that hold the throttle body onto the plenum. I pull out the torque wrench for oil filter canisters on the newer style Toyotas, oil drain plugs, lug nuts, things that too loose or too tight can cause catastrophic failure or death. But things like brackets that hold hoses onto the bodies of cars, I know that I'm not going to over tighten this. I also know that I'm not going to leave it too loose. So yep, my car, 16 foot-pounds. Double check for your own. I'm just about to bolt on the plenum. There is also an order to the bolt. It's not just a circle. It's like making a star, whatever. Again, find that spec for your particular vehicle. Just wanted to throw it out there. Make sure that this surface is clean and that there's no debris on the seal, which you're more than welcome to change. It's cheap enough. If you listen to me in the beginning and you watch the whole video before you dove into the job, probably a good idea to stuff those with plastic bags or paper towels so nothing falls down into your motor. Because if like a nut or a bolt or something or a tool falls down in there, you bought yourself a new motor. So I didn't, but I know that I didn't lose anything either, but in hindsight I should have. So relaying it to you. Absolutely critical when you're putting the intake manifold plenum onto the intake manifold. Make sure that the studs, now remember, one of mine came off, the stud came out with the nut, the other one, the nut came off of the stud. Make sure that those, however they're configured, I think, by the way, that those should be bolts. Like, I would actually recommend changing them to bolts, but again, I'm not smarter than the Honda engineer. Anyway, make sure that this lines up the very bottom, you know, way underneath where that little hole in the splash pan. Make sure that the bottom 2 bolts that are excess from the bottom of the car are lined up with the holes in that bracket, or you could put tension on the intake manifold and crack it, okay? So as I do this, a lot of different extensions, a lot of different combinations. I got my, I guess that's not a U-joint, it wobbles. It's more like a CV shaft. I think I showed you guys before. I do have the U-joint style one, which I hate because it makes too much of an angle, which is never good. But I can't believe how much use I'm getting out of this guy in this job. It's just a little round socket wrench, and you know, it's obnoxious to get in there with a, you know, with a regular wrench and have to deal with the handle. Obviously, we're going to come back and tighten that more. I got it in there with my nice little paper towel trick. You know, you got one here. Probably don't need that long of a, you know, an extension, but you know, point is, handy to have that round socket wrench, because you know, I could very quickly get that, I don't even want to say finger tight, it's not tight, just, you know, all the way in. Then we're going to go back with a torque wrench, and I'm probably going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess 5, 6, the one that's underneath, that miserable one that's below the throttle body there. I cleaned up all these bolts with my wire wheel, and put the absolute tiniest, I mean, there was like a dab of oil on my finger. I just rubbed the very tip of it so as it went in, it wouldn't hang up on the corroded aluminum. Not enough to change its you know, fastening abilities. So those are almost all, again, I don't want to say snug, but almost all bottomed out, and I'm going to go in and torque them to 16 foot-pounds. I just reconnected that. It's not an easy connection, but it's not particularly difficult. I just soaked a clean towel in antifreeze and wiped the pipe with it first, slid it on, used my fancy pliers to put the hose clamp back on. I am going to hit the inside of this, never touch the plate because you can screw up the car, but I'm going to hit the inside of this with some carb cleaner, as it would probably do the car some good. No idle air control valve in these. The computer regulates this guy. Don't touch it. Whatever you do, don't touch it, because the computer knows where it is, and if it moves, it can screw up the car. But I'm just going to spray some carb cleaner in there before I put the throttle body back on and torque it down. I realized as I was doing it, the only thing holding the bugger in was the hose that I had forgotten to disconnect from the pipe that we replaced. So cool beans for me, I guess. I took it out and cleaned it up nice. Did not touch the butterfly valve. Sprayed, used like probably a whole can. Love the way it smells. I think all car people do. Anyway, use the pressure of the spray to clean around that, and it's any carbon that was left behind is now saturated in it and will break up, which is nice. Little free tune-up for your project here. Anyways, these they kind of swing around behind the throttle body, in these holes here. 1, 2 holes. There's little nubbies right there, and that's how they go on. These probably fell off. Hopefully not down your motor. Remember, put bags or towels in there or whatever. And then we will torque down the throttle body. In line with my tendency to be like over the top, I took these to the wire wheel, cleaned off the threads. Again, just put a tiny bit of oil on the tip of my glove and rubbed it on so it would go through but not affect you know, the fastening abilities under the torque spec, which again we believe to be 16 foot-pounds. These little gizmos that flip through, I'm not sure they're the same on both sides, by the way. I didn't check that, but I got it right the first time, so whatever. These nut bracket things that hang on there, and get the top, I probably shouldn't have to tell you this, but just in case, get the top ones started first, and they will hold that in place for you while you do the bottom ones. And then also don't forget, you got a connection, you can see the pipe there and where it connects to the part we replaced. You got to make that connection, and then eventually this guy goes on to, you can't see it, no, I guess you can, it goes on there. So those connections need to be made as well, and the harness there. Also to the plug where the bracket was crappy and broke, I'm going to redo this reusable tie wrap gizmo. Super neat, just like one of those brackets. It has like a tab you lift and it undoes itself. Way on down the line where that harness, the bottom wire, at some point it can touch this one without having to pull on it. So I took a nice long tie wrap, started it where I can see, very gently tightened it. Never put any tension whatsoever on this, but kept it away from the broken bracket here that can hurt it. So that's done. I very carefully followed the tie wrap down with my fingers and my clipper there and my dikes, sorry, in the other hand, and snipped it off, being careful not to cut anything I couldn't see. Core principle, don't work on stuff you can't see, obviously. But anyways, that connection there, it reminds me of like one of the ECU connections where there's a plug that goes in and then there's this like harness over it that like locks it in. Showed you guys that in the disassembly, but you know, goes back together the same way, I guess is my point. Unfortunately, that bracket is shot, but this solution will last as long as the car, so no harm, no foul. Not sure this is going to make sense, but when you're refilling this, don't do what I just did and fill the neck of the funnel. Slower is better, because as you fill this, if you have a sealed system, the only way that it's really breathing, you know, the only way that the air is getting out to make room for the coolant is through the same tube you're filling it through. So if you fill up the funnel, the neck of the funnel, you have to wait for it to go down, which takes longer than going like a little bit slower, so that the neck of the funnel is not full. Okay, everybody, it's all back together. It's buttoned up. Basically what you want to do, if you can, with the front of the vehicle elevated, with this cap off, run it for a while until there's no more bubbles coming out of here. You should know how to burp a radiator if you're doing a job like this, but basically what we want to do is make sure that there's no air pockets in the engine. So with the heat all the way on and the car running, I let it run for like an hour and a half while I was cleaning up the garage and doing some other little things. Not that entire time, of course, with the cap off, because it'll start to overflow, but I, you know, filled it up and you know, left the funnel in there, let all the bubbles come up, and then of course cleaned the engine bay so the coolant smell goes away. But this is Drew from Pellet Cars, and again, just want to thank you guys for watching. If you found this video at all helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel. We try to walk you guys through stuff that, you know, stumbled us. You know, if we can get through it, you can get through it. And we want to help you do just that. We also want to show you guys cool JDM cars and hot rods and classic American cars and such. So basically building our channel with some good content. So be sure to subscribe to it. And again, if this video was at all helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.